Hi there, good evening everyone. Thanks for giving us this chance to talk. We're going to talk about environmentalism and sustainability. I'm KKrish and this is Taylor Halliday. We lovingly call her Tay as well. We're both representing Krish Energy. So, what are we here to talk about? I mean, we don't want to say this is the exact right or wrong way, but we do want to throw some light on what we think are the blind spots in the way we approach environmentalism today. So a couple of questions to open up our minds and set the backdrop for today's talk. First, do we think, or do you think that the climate risk is the only or the biggest sustainability issue we're facing as humanity? Just hold that thought, think about it, we'll come back to it at the end of the talk. And then the second follow-up question, if I as an individual say we need to lower our materials footprint instead of just worrying about our carbon footprint, or if I say we need to prioritize clean air over climate risk mitigation, am I being a bad environmentalist? So just think about that, and I'm going to give the stage over to Tay.
Hello everyone, my name is Tay. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is carbon emissions versus pollutants. So since Al Gore's crusade against fossil fuels, most legislation that's based on sustainability has been really rooted in the idea that we need to reduce carbon emissions. And this, although is a good thing, we should also not forget about other factors contributing to sustainability, such as air pollution that kills millions of people every year, and also plastic pollution that is killing ecosystems in the oceans, right? So another thing I want to kind of talk about is the Paris Climate Agreement. So what exactly is the Paris Climate Agreement? Well, it's basically a treaty that connects 192 countries, including the EU, and its main purpose is to keep global temperatures from rising 1.5 degrees Celsius. They hope to achieve this by having individual countries submit nationally determined contributions, or NDCs for short. These NDCs work on 5-year periods, and essentially what they say is, okay, my individual country can do this and this for the environment without crumbling my economic growth. So, another thing we should keep in mind when talking about the Paris Climate Agreement is the fact that these NDCs do not have any sort of repercussions when these individual countries don't meet those goals. So as we can see from this graph, I got a little bit. China and India have been steadily increasing their carbon emissions, while the United States and the EU have been slightly decreasing it. But if we sum all of the carbon emissions that these major countries that are connected to the Paris Climate Agreement, we can see that the trend is very upward, right? From 1970, we're releasing more carbon emissions than ever before. So this basically begs the question whether or not the Paris Climate Agreement is really doing that much to curb the reduction of carbon emissions, right? That's horrible. It's not working. So another thing I want to talk about is electric vehicles. They're kind of coined as the champion of green, right? We hear about them constantly. So there are good things about electric vehicles. This is not to say that they're horrible, right? For instance, they don't rely heavily on fossil fuels, which is great. They also reduce the cost of fuel by making the demand less, so everyone wins in this situation, right? That's super nice. We don't have to rely on countries in the Middle East for oil supplies heavily. They're also cheaper to own in the long term. They're versatile, so for instance, you can pop a solar panel on the top of that Tesla, but if that's cramping your style, you can also just plop it on the top of your house and plug that bad boy into your house and clean energy. Isn't that cool? They're also more trendy, so if you're feeling really cool, you can buy a Tesla, go to your friend's party, and then boom, you got yourself a date. So that's cool. So just like with everything, there's a good and bad side to it, right? For instance, Tesla was ranked the 22nd in the Toxic Air Polluters Index, which is actually worse than ExxonMobil and Chevron, which is kind of unbelievable, right? We think of them as horrible, right? When it comes to sustainability and environmentalism at least. And this is primarily due to lithium mining. And lithium mining primarily happens in emerging countries such as China, whose environmental policies are a lot more lax than they are in the United States and the EU. Another problem with electric vehicles is the fact that they're a lot harder to implement in emerging countries, and this is for a variety of different reasons. For instance, electric vehicles are very expensive or have like a high upfront cost, which makes average citizens in these emerging countries not able to afford them. So reducing carbon emissions in these emerging countries would be a lot harder with the idea of trying to implement electric vehicles. Another problem with this is the fact that electric vehicles use electricity as fuel, right? And most of the electricity that is produced in emerging countries is not in the form of clean energy. So if you're driving an electric vehicle and you're using electricity in emerging countries to fuel that, it's really doing much to be environmentally friendly at that point. Another thing with electric vehicles is there's kind of a political agenda attached to them. I don't know if you've noticed this, but oftentimes you can see on the news that certain political parties or certain people are promoting electric vehicles, and this can be bad for a variety of different reasons. And this is because political parties get funding from certain industries, fast-growing industries that are wealthy, such as electric vehicles, right? And this oftentimes leads to politicians often like making electric vehicles, for instance, seem a lot better than they actually are, which is worse for the general welfare. So some key takeaways when we're looking at new technologies such as electric vehicles is like they're not a complete solution to our environmental crisis that we're having, so they shouldn't be regarded as such, right? Another problem with electric vehicles is, again, as outlined before with emerging countries and how we're fueling them, we shouldn't have this idea that this solution will work for everyone. It's not going to work for everyone. Each country has its own, is going to need its own solution because they have certain different problems, right? And so maybe funding more public transportation in emerging countries is a lot more beneficial when it comes to sustainability and environmentalism. Okay, one other thing that I want to highlight is another way that companies and corporations claim to be more environmentally friendly, and this is the form of carbon offsets. So what exactly are carbon offsets? Carbon offsets essentially are when companies and corporations claim to have produced net zero carbon emissions by the idea that they're either planting trees or preserving forests that were previously assumed to be endangered. So what happens typically is these companies give funding to environmental protection agencies or some sort of preserve, but oftentimes these preserves are not actually endangered, so they're not really accomplishing this zero net carbon idea. And also, another problem with this idea is the fact that there's not enough fertile land on the planet to actually achieve net zero carbon if every corporation or company was to like adopt this ideology. So we need to hold these companies and corporations accountable for all the bad that they're doing for the environment. So maybe the Pentagon might know somebody who's up for kicking these bad guys in the butt. Hello, Pentagon? Do you know somebody who's up for the task?
Hello, Tay.
Who are you?
I am Captain Planet.
Did the Pentagon send you? You know what? I'm gonna let you take over. Whatever.
Well, whether the Pentagon sent me or not, Captain Planet is here to help lovely Tay with her message on environmentalism. Oh, Captain Planet can't work the pointer. Houston, we have an issue. All right. So before we get into what the solutions are, let's understand the problem we're facing. Let's start with some definitions. Now, I personally love how Vinod Khosla, who is a tech visionary, billionaire in California, founder of Sun Microsystems, and he said this. He said, climate change is misunderstood. I do not consider it climate change, but climate risk. There is climate risk, there is national security risk, there is geopolitical risks. If we frame it in terms of risk, the question is which risk should we take and which we shouldn't. So just a different mindset. This is not about denying climate change or saying for sure we have control over how much climate change is happening. This is just about framing it in risks terms. Second, let's think about what exactly is environmentalism. Now this is a quote from the founder of Marsh Society, Robert Zubrin. Both Tay and I had the pleasure of touring his facility in Lakewood, Colorado. Now he said environmentalism is an effort to apply practical solutions to real environmental problems. So keep that in mind as we go forward in this presentation. So let's talk about now another term, sustainability. Now sustainability, the foundations of sustainable development was done in the 1980s by something called the Brundtland Commission. The United Nations appointed Brundtland Commission. It was named after a Norwegian Prime Minister, and they came up with this report on sustainable development. What they said, at a very high level, they defined sustainable development as something where the present, it's a development where the needs of the present are done without compromising the needs of future ability to meet their own needs. I mumbled a lot of words over there, but again, we can meet our present needs, but do not compromise our children and grandchildren's ability to meet their own needs. So they left it high level in there. Now, generally over the past few decades in sustainability, it's based on 3 pillars. It said for sustainable development, it has to be environmentally sustainable, it has to be socially sustainable, and it has to be economically sustainable. Those were like the 3 pillars of sustainable development. However, I believe there is a 4th very key missing pillar, which is security. And Europe sort of is learning the hard way right now. Meaning, what is not secure isn't sustainable either. So think about that when we think about sustainable development. So now we talk about, I know I may be pushing some triggers when I use the word woke environmentalism. But basically it's about putting everything under the umbrella of climate action and neglecting the ones that maybe question the climate action. That is, in my opinion, just a wrong way to approach things. Why? Because what I call Al Gore school of environmentalism or fake environmentalism, it says fossil fuels are the real enemy, and then carbon is the metric that we need to use to save our planet, save the environment. Now again, I am not a climate denier. I think there is a real risk to it, and I'm framing it differently. Now, some of the issues with that, with the Al Gore framing of this, what it does is, it puts a lot of the economic burden on the already developed Western nations. So for a graphic visualization, look at that world map over there. China, which is in red, alone emits more carbon dioxide than all of the regions in blue today. So just think about that. All of the regions in blue, we are increasingly putting costs on ourselves to lower our carbon footprint, which is carbon dioxide footprint. However, China alone will beat us in terms of emissions right now. There's very fancy carbon accounting. Tay pointed out some of the issues with carbon offsets. So a lot of the greenness has been sort of hijacked for monetary purposes with fancy accounting systems. Emissions from Asia will keep rising. I can't say that enough. And last, and I think one of the most important points, and this is personal for me, the biggest issue with the whole climate action, sticking with carbon as a metric, is you may be overshadowing some of the other very real environmental concerns that we're facing as humanity. What are they? Let me give you a little snapshot of that. So, let's look at the Asian environment crisis. Now, these are some stats from India. If you don't know, Captain Planet, Kartik Krishna, I was originally born in Hyderabad in India, and I was in Delhi in May this year. Now Delhi has this infamous thing of being in the top 10 of the world's most polluted cities consistently over the past decade or so. 6 or 7 of the top most polluted cities of the top 10 are in India. Now the issue with this is, you might say, then we should be more active in climate action, right? The problem is, if you can see that pie chart over there, about 60%, and I will send you these slides later if you want, about 60+% of the air pollution, which is particulate matter pollution, not carbon emissions, comes from sources other than just transportation. It comes from waste burning. It comes from bad practices in constructions and other areas which creates dust in Indian cities. So if you want to approach this as an air pollution problem, the solutions you may come up with are going to be vastly different. Why do I think this is very, very urgent and should be prioritized? Think about this. 4.4 million children in Delhi today have lung damage which is irreparable. So that is the reality in India. Now, I'm actually going to skip through this, not to give you any too much information overload over here, but this slide basically talks about how lithium mining and processing in Asia is only making it worse over there, and Tate did a great job of pointing that out. So I'm just going to move on to the next slide. So, one other thing. These are some of the stats on the premature deaths due to air pollution. China says annually there are about 400,000 people dying in China because of bad air. Delhi's air is 3 times worse than Beijing. So think about that. If I was in charge of the environmental protection in India, I would say, don't worry about anything else. Get me clean air first, right? And that's what I'm trying to point out, in the sense that there is difference in between saying I want environmentalism and I just want some action on climate risk mitigation. Now, to summarize, what we're trying is, if you want to manage the climate risk, what are we saving? And I know this is oversimplified. We're basically saying extreme weather events. We want to prevent the ice from melting in the Arctics, right? And then maybe we want to prevent some of the drought situation in California. I don't know, Russia may have better like farming and agriculture if the climate worst case scenario comes true, but that is still the worst case scenario. We are preventing extreme weathers. What are we preventing if we prioritize air pollution or clean air? We're actually preventing millions of children in Beijing and Delhi from having irreparable lung damage. That's the urgency of this. Now, I do want to point out, I can't say this enough and enough. It does not mean that you have to ignore, think. You have to understand they're both interrelated. If you mitigate air pollution, if you have cleaner air, you will actually help with the climate risk mitigation. It's a matter of priorities. Now, for those that are nerds over here, I'll give you one example. Have you heard of carbon capture and storage technologies? US Department of Energy invests tons, I'm sure it's in the billions, into a technology which basically captures carbon from the air, stores it. Now think about that. You can have carbon neutral, meaning you may mitigate the climate risk by a technology that does nothing on the other pollutants, that does nothing on the waste reduction. That's what we need to, that's what I call a blind spot when it comes to climate action. To summarize, again, too many words, but I'll be happy to email this slide to anyone. I want to quote this man over here. He was the India head for Mercedes-Benz, an automotive company. I know Germany is one of the biggest investors in electric vehicles. And this is what he said. He said, if you deploy a new petroleum fuel or derivative of petroleum vehicle in Indian roads with the right pollution controls, meaning that do not emit the toxic carbon, the sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, and the other stuff, that petroleum fuel vehicle is actually cleaner than plugging in an electric vehicle into the Indian grid. Why? Because Indian grid is powered by coal and they have very poor filters on them. So again, you have to understand, people that say we're helping the climate because we're driving electric vehicles, not always true. And I want to highlight this line once more. You saw the difference between the direction, the trajectory of India and China in terms of carbon emissions. With things like the Paris Agreement, with things what I call the climate action, you're giving a victim card and a free, emissions card to India and China because you're saying the West needs to do more because West got industrialized and emitted more carbon. As someone who was born in India, I would say start judging someone's environmental action on how pure their air is. It does not matter whether India is emitting low carbon per capita today when the children are suffering lung damage. And India, I will say this, it needs more peer pressure, or you need to start thinking about this on measuring each other based on air quality, water quality, and maybe materials footprint rather than just carbon. So, I know I pointed out a lot of things that are wrong, but maybe we can dare suggest some solutions. By the way, that's me, Tay, and my awesome operations engineer over there, Michael. So we believe, or at least I personally believe, that our public discourse needs a complete reboot. You can't just say it's climate action, it's mitigating carbon, it's carbon net zero, or nothing. You have to understand that sustainability is not exactly equal to environmentalism, is not exactly equal to climate action. The second thing, and I pointed out so much about the issues with carbon as being the singular metric for sustainability, we should start thinking about integrated accounting tools. Now, what are there? I'm going to give you just a sample of what the integrated tools are. So, there's a French company called KKrish. KKrish is a fashion accessory company. They make a lot of fashion accessories, but they invested a lot in sustainability, and they have this free app wherein you can pick up, and this is an example for a bag that you can purchase from KKrish, where you can say, these are the components of my bag, this is what the manufacturing process is, and this is the region that it's manufactured on. What's my environmental impact? And it gives out the answer over here. Now let me point this out. I know it's tiny, but the factors, the different colors, there's air pollution, there's carbon emissions, there's land use, waste, there's water consumption and water usage. They integrate all that into one metric, and they say the environmental cost is 52 euros. That's just their metric. Now, the same app, I changed some of the metrics, the cost come down to 22 euros. You know one of the biggest factors why it went from 52 euros environmental cost to 22 euros? I changed the manufacturing region from China to Europe. My point there is, you don't have to make fossil fuels the enemy. We don't have to have people in California suffering heat with no AC, or people in Texas freezing to death in winters because we want more renewables. We can simply move manufacturing back from Asia and do good for the environment. Politically, that's not something people want to hear, but feel free to go ahead and contest on this based on the facts and the numbers that I'm giving today. Now, another integrated tool that I want to show, to the right over there, that's the Pentagon Peacock Sustainability Scoring. Now, relevant disclosure, KKrish Energy is developing that rating system, so as you can see, I do have a vested interest in saying that's the best thing that we need to do, but disclosure there. What's different between the KKrish system, the French system, and what we are doing here in Colorado is, firstly, KKrish looks at products. So if you buy a handbag, you buy whatever other accessory, and it gives an environmental footprint. What we do is we're going to rate corporations on their environmental or sustainability, on our own sustainability system. And what's very unique, no one on this planet has done this as far as I know. We have a very key dimension, which is the employee engagement, the right over here. We want to empower employees, and we want to employ everyday citizens of our society with ways to lower our materials footprint. Because we want to reduce the plastic going to the ocean. We want to reduce the use of toxic mineral mining. But we do that not by going carbon zero only, we do that by reducing our materials footprint. That's what KKrish is promoting. So again, that's why we're here to talk about and get your support. I believe that's it.
Are there any questions? really blinding light.
What made you so passionate?
Thank you, Nite. So what made me so passionate to do this? I want to tell you this. During my master's, I was a scholar at Sustainable Futures Institute in Michigan Tech. I used to work in manufacturing, and I took a strong liking to what's called environmentally benign manufacturing. However, and I graduated in 2006. Over the past decade or so, you cannot have a conversation about environment or sustainability without saying climate change or without saying carbon footprint. For me, I saw that as a key gap. And I'm just passionate. I've always been passionate about sustainable development. And I'm one of those, well, you see something wrong, you might as well roll up your sleeves and act upon it. So, a big shout out to Linan, who's the early investor for KKrish Energy. She's also an instructor at UCCS Mechanical and Aerospace Department, and she's the one that introduced the lovely couple, Maritza and Flip. So, okay, a big shout out for Tay, please. Can we hear it for Tay? Any other questions? Okay. Bob Armstrong over here is one of the best technical minds that I'm aware of, and I kept asking this, why does Germany not like nuclear? Now, I personally think nuclear, as long as we can figure out the security and then the waste disposal aspect, I think it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. I personally would love to see a lot of nuclear deployed in India, although I'd like to see promotion of nuclear hydrogen, which is pink hydrogen, because I do not want us to put all our energy baskets in the power grid. From a security point, we're creating a very brittle system. So, my personal opinion, I think nuclear is going to be the future. It's a question of when. And I also think it doesn't mean that we can still put everything on the power grid. Try to diversify. That's what my opinion is.
Thank you, Captain Planet. Thank you, Taylor. We're gonna take a picture for sure. Can't pass up a chance to take a picture with Captain Planet. I mean, come on. All right. So thank you so much, guys. Thank you everyone for being here today. Our next Nerd Night at Kauai, Wednesday, October 19th. Please remember that it is now 6 p.m. doors open and 6:30 p.m. presentations start.